Welcome to Finance in the Clouds. Modern finance is broken, forcing finance and accounting teams to work like it's 1985, the year Excel was invented. Here, we talk about the struggles finance teams face in fast-growing companies and discuss how they can spend less time catching up and more time in the clouds. I'm your host, Jake Jones, multimedia producer and brand influencer at Zone & Co., and I'm joined this week by Snyers, VP of Global ERP Sales, and Micky, Agyeman, NetSuite Implementation Manager, both at Zone & Co. Thanks for joining me today, guys.
Hey, Jake, it's awesome. Thanks for having us.
Nice to be here, yes.
Integrating your business with an ERP can be a daunting task. How you prepare and approach your implementation can make all the difference. So today, we'll be discussing some potential roles you could hire to help with your NetSuite implementation. Before we dive into this topic, just wanted to give you both a space to tell us a little bit more about yourselves, what you do for us here at Zone.
Sure, Jake. As you said, I'm heading our ERP sales team. As you know, Zone has two big lines of business. One is the apps, where we bring on software solutions on top of the standard NetSuite offering. But historically, Zone & Co., as well as Fast Forward, the company that was taken over beginning of this year, where I was a partner in Europe, we were solution providers, and we still are. So that means that I'm responsible for this line of business. Myself, I'm what you can call an ERP veteran. As the very first NetSuite solution provider in a small country in the heart of Europe called Belgium, where after a couple of years and having implemented a few customers, I joined Fast Forward, a company in the Netherlands in 2020, which then merged beginning of this year with Zone & Co. And so today I'm still responsible for this ERP solution provider activity.
Absolutely. Well, Jan, we're glad to have you, and it's so exciting to have the team of Fast Forward part of Zone now, and really excited to hear what you have to talk about on this topic. But before we go, Micky, tell us about yourself.
So my name is Micky Agyeman. I'm a family man living here in Virginia with a wife and two young boys that keep me very active. So for Zone, I am an implementation manager. Zone does do ERP implementations, so I help the team to be able to get those into the client environment when they're coming onto NetSuite. A little bit deeper of my background, I also came up with ERP as well. I'm starting around 2006 or so on Oracle's PeopleSoft, and then around 2014, finding my way onto the platform of NetSuite when the consultancy that I was with switched to the whole cloud applications. So that's the journey thus far.
Glad to have you both on the podcast today with all of your ERP experience to talk about what NetSuite role should a company hire for their implementation. And before we even ask that question, I want to just lay the groundwork of why this may be something you'd want to look at. What are some easily avoidable challenges that a company may face when they're starting the implementation process for the first time? Things that could be solved with hiring some help.
Like I said, I'm a veteran in the industry, so I think I actively went through maybe 100 implementations. And most of the time, things went quite smoothly, but there's indeed a few challenges that we came across. And I'd like to split those customers actually in three categories. You have your small operations, let's say 10 to 15 users, very much still relying on the original team of founders of the business. Then you have your scale-ups, and the largest companies would be the mature mid-market kind of companies. I've done implementations in all of these, and I must say it's quite different in terms also of challenges. When you look at those small companies, there you have your challenges like key user availability. Who's going to help? Who's going to be available to work on the project of implementing the ERP software? These are not mature organizations, so knowledge and power is still very much concentrated within the leadership team. So if you want to implement, you want to bring in data, you want to ask a question about business processes, all of that, you automatically almost are pointed to the owner or the founder of the business for the right answer, where, of course, this person then very often becomes a bottleneck in the implementation. That's a challenge in smaller implementations, and perhaps also the lack of technical expertise, specialist knowledge around how to integrate applications with each other, data models, BI reporting, etc. It's all still very pioneering. Chances of finding experts in these domains are not so big. When we then look at the more scale-up companies, let's say 10, 15, maybe up to 50 users on the ERP system, there very often you see companies are growing fast. And again, you have then the question of who's available to help out on the implementation. Do people have enough time to work alongside the implementation partner? The challenge also in those organizations is that, and this already starts in the selection phase actually, is that people need to pick a system or choose a solution that can grow with the company. So already one of the challenges there is that in the selection process, you have to, as an organization, you have to be looking at the solution that does not only do what you do today, but can grow with your company, can be scaled to host many more users than you have today, etc. And then looking at the mid-market group of companies, there's a saying in Dutch where we say, don't put old wine in new bags. So what that means is look at your business processes. Don't simply move from one ERP to the other and just maintain your exact way of working as you're used to and just try to put it in a new system. That doesn't work. You have to take advantage of this renewal process, this new ERP environment to really look at how you do things, maybe do some process re-engineering, redesign. You have to look at your probably huge amounts of historical data that you've built up and take advantage of this ERP migration to really cleanse those data and put in the new system exactly what you need and not the whole history, which has no value anymore. And of course, also because these organizations tend to be large, you have to look at various departments working together. And that can also be sometimes a challenge where people have to be brought together from different companies, different geographies, etc. So that can also be a challenge in implementing ERP there.
Well, for one, I love your new expression of don't put all the wine in new baskets. That's a great one. But also, I thought it was interesting that kind of a thing that rang true between all of those segments that you presented to us. Someone's got to really focus on this or be able to assist with the implementation. It seemed like even a smaller or growing company, you may not have that person who's available, who can really focus on this because they're already juggling so many other things. Micky, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Absolutely. If you're just importing your old processes into a new system, then, what's the point? So one of the most easily avoidable situations is to really understand the new system before you even start to implement it. Has anybody done any deep dive into it within the organization? Has anybody taken any resources, white papers, or whatever's available to understand the full breadth and depth of this new system that we're going to implement? I think that is key and is easily avoidable. And then the last thing is data. I think John hinted a bit on it, right? People look at what's in their current system as if it's so pristine. We're able to get our reports. We're able to do this and that. And that's where they have their comfort. That old system may not resonate well with what you're implementing. So understanding the complexities in trying to bring, whether if it's your old history, whether if it's your chart of account structure, whether if it's your entity data and so forth, how are you going to bring those into this new system you're implementing? And how pristine is that data? Are you bringing all of it or not? So data really becomes one of the big issues that if we paid attention to it ahead of time, it can be avoided.
And we've got a great podcast that talks all about data migration and how to prepare for that. So thanks for bringing that up, Micky. But also another thing you mentioned there that I think so rings true is you need someone who understands the system that you're about to step into. And I think that's a huge takeaway here. And so now that we've painted a picture of what this process looks like, and again, some of the easily avoidable challenges that may be presented to you as you're a company doing this for the first time, let's get down to the topic at hand. So what NetSuite role should you hire for your implementation?
I think with any implementation, as we were rightly saying, the big issue is the resource, right? You have your current employees who are already focused on their day-to-day job. So you need additional resources in order to be able to free them from their day-to-day job and focus on implementation, or the new people that you're hiring will be the ones focused on the implementation. One of the key hires, in my opinion, is getting an administrator ahead of time. A lot of companies overlook this step because they think, oh, well, a system like NetSuite is very user-friendly. It's easy to use and customize. So therefore, the controller can do it, or the VP of finance, whoever that administrator is that was set up as the initial account holder tends to be the admin in the beginning and remains the admin. But unfortunately, it doesn't lend to best practices. It doesn't lend to success further down the line. So bringing in an administrator ahead of time, one will get them to be able to understand what were the decisions in which why we implemented, the way we did. What were some of the things that we did to customize? Why is this workflow working this way? Why is this data that way? And all sorts of little nuances that you don't need to ramp the person up later on when you actually do hire them, right? So bringing an administrator in will be very, 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 very key. I think in addition to that will be somebody who I would say is more of a financial, architect, or like a technical accountant, because there are things in NetSuite that one must know where it will lend them to be able to use NetSuite in its proper form and for best practices. When sometimes you think, okay, we know this, we do our business a certain way, you're limiting yourself in some of the capabilities and the major uses of NetSuite. So you're just putting that new wine in an old bag. But if a company will broaden their horizon a little bit and think to hire a technical accountant, they can, raise the awareness to say, okay, here are some of the things we need. Here are ways we want to reconcile and all these other accounting transactions. What does it look like in NetSuite? How do we do it as such? And that person will be very, very, very vital in an implementation to be able to have the implementation successful.
Yeah, I totally agree with Micky that an administrator is something you need. And I'd like to take a step back. Why is that so important? Because you could say, okay, we implement an ERP, or we're automated. Most of the processes are now automated, and that's it. Well, you have to understand that, especially with a cloud ERP system, you have 2 times per year, in the case of NetSuite, you have a new version, you have new possibilities, you have new modules coming on. You have the possibility also to customize the solution, to create your own reporting. That's all the features that NetSuite brings. So sometimes our prospects or customers still have they start off with the opinion, okay, I'm going to get a new ERP, I'm going to implement it, and then I'm done. Well, that's not the case, because what we see is the key in the success of having an ERP system like NetSuite for your organization is in taking ownership. And we as implementation partners, we're there to help you to implement it in the best possible way, to tell you all about the built-in best practices. You can take advantage of those, etc. But you need to have people on board that can take over that implementation after go live and keep it alive and keep it growing and keep it working for everybody in the organization as time goes by.
Well, you guys touched on a lot of different roles and people you might want to look for there. And I want to dive deeper into a couple of those roles. And maybe what we could do here is paint a little bit of a picture of why you might look at hiring this position. What does the company look like who might need a NetSuite administrator?
I think we'll agree that having an administrator on board that can keep the application alive and make it grow in the organization, that's great. But what do you do if you only have 10 users or 15 users and you can't afford a full-time administrator, obviously? Well, even then, in that situation, it's good to have somebody on board that can act to some extent as the administrator and then really understand how the ERP is built, how the data is entering in the system, and can be taught maybe by us as a partner or by NetSuite how to build those reports and how to create custom workflows and all that. And of course, as companies grow and when you're a scale up or you're in the mid-market segment, then it's really important to have dedicated people, maybe even if your organization is a bit larger, have 2 people for redundancy reasons, 2 people that understand the application and can, like I said, take really ownership and make it better.
Yeah, I think any company of any size, just like Jan said, if you can afford it, I think it's a very good investment. When the company's too small and you just have somebody identified as one, then they just have to be able to, identify that, hey, in addition to my regular work, I need to spend the time, go through release preview notes, go through suite answers for some of these things to be able to do. So I think it's a win-win if a company invests in one.
Awesome. Well, let's talk about a different role. Why would a company hire a NetSuite developer?
For a NetSuite developer per se, I think it becomes critical when you have a very complex rollout or a very complex implementation. Jan was trying to give us the breakdown of you have your smaller growth customers, and then you have your mid-market, and then you have your enterprise. So in implementation, sometimes when it's at the enterprise level or the higher end of mid-market, there tends to be a lot of intricacies within that. They might have a lot of external systems that need integrations. You might need custom solutioning around your processes, right? Where you need to write Suite script and you need to write complex workflows that automate certain things. And in those instances, it's really best to have a developer. Now, whether to hire them on full-time or at least bring them on as a contractor in an implementation is one thing. But I think certainly you do need one to be able to implement. Oftentimes, companies look to the solution provider or the implementation partner to do a lot of that. And, us at Zone, we're fortunate to be able to have developers to be able to do that. But maybe your implementation partner may not. So the skill set for maybe what you need might not be there. So it's definitely incumbent upon the customer going through implementation, depending on the complexity of that implementation, to take on a developer, whether temporary or permanently. There's certain modules that you just kind of need one, in certain processes. You have some big inventory warehouse back and forth, or you have Suite Commerce integrations with this payment platform, and it becomes very, very, very complex, right? So having one readily available will certainly benefit implementation.
Well, we've kind of danced around this person as well, but what about a NetSuite implementation consultant? Why would a company want to hire them to help with their implementation?
So with a NetSuite implementation consultant, I think for the most part, that is a resource you would get from an implementation partner. An implementation partner is there to guide you through the implementation, to show you the capabilities and features of the system, to help get you where you have all your data, all your processes and everything within NetSuite, and then be able to transact and record everything within NetSuite. So for an implementation consultant, it's almost a given that it's necessary for an implementation. But for the most part, I think it comes with the implementation by the implementation partner. If a company is to hire one on, they would have to have some very complex systems going. Or I've also seen instances where the company themselves have a very elaborate in-house solution that they need to merge into NetSuite, where the partner is basically drawing a line that, okay, we only touch NetSuite, and outside of that, that's dependent upon you. So that's when, sort of a middle person implementation consultant came in to be able to help the customer on their side of the system and how it bridges across to NetSuite. But outside of instances like that, I think the resources is already built into kind of the SOW of providing the implementation.
Yeah, because I think an implementation consultant, and the word itself, it says a lot in the sense that as a company implementing an ERP system, you also have to think about your people strategy. So what happens if you hire somebody that considers himself a consultant? How long is that person going to be willing to stay in your organization when the storm is over? Those are the profiles that we have on our payroll. And those are the people that like to spend some time in the company, learn all about it, share best practices, guide the company through the implementation, give it all they got, and then move on to the next project. So you have to ask yourself, okay, is it wise for me as a company to hire such profiles and then after a year having to let them go because I don't have enough challenges anymore? Or shall I not better rely on a partner that has those profiles in-house, well-trained, available for me at a certain cost? I do agree. But I think that's a much wiser decision.
Really interesting insights there of just, do you want somebody who's going to really invest their time and invest their focus on your company and not be juggling lots of different things? I hadn't thought about it that way. So thank you both for sharing those thoughts. Are there any closing thoughts or any closing advice that you would give to a company as far as who to consider hiring or what to consider preparing for as they start an implementation with a NetSuite or any ERP system for the first time?
I think first, the selection of your ERP is very important. And there, as I already mentioned, it's very important to have you consulted or supported by somebody outside of the organization that can bring a lot of insights, can really have you as a business owner or as a manager look at your business from a different angle with best practices from the industry, but from other organizations, and that can really coach you in making the right selection. What is the solution you really need? And like I said, it is not the solution that's going to have all the features and functions you need today. It's going to be the solution that has that, but on top of it, has the capacity of growing with your organization, be scalable, be flexible. Yeah, needless to mention that NetSuite is a solution like that.
Just piggyback off of that, I think sometimes what's helpful as well is a project manager, even in-house on the customer side, whether you want to completely hire somebody new or just identify somebody, because there needs to be a point of contact that the implementation team can address certain things with, can escalate certain things with, or can just, simply just for communicating and making sure we're all in sync and things like that. A little bit further out from the implementation as well might be an enterprise systems architect. There are many different applications that may speak to NetSuite, whether at the time of implementation or in the future. What is the company's roadmap going forward? Are they wanting to move everything to single sign-on? Are they wanting to have one platform as a middleware for integrations and things like that? So somebody who can know NetSuite, know the technical intricacies of it, to be able to help drive some of those conversations as the companies grows from there. So it might not be a hire necessarily for implementation, but definitely in the future, companies should be looking to get something like that on board.
Micky, Jan, thank you both again for sharing your expertise on this topic. And I really feel like we've given a lot of insights and a lot of really interesting conversation starters about what a company should look into, what roles they should maybe look into and be thinking about as they're looking to start this implementation. So thank you both for being here today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us. I hope, the listeners get some insight from this.
Yeah, it was great to be on the show. It's always great to share experiences.
And now we want to hear from you. How are you preparing for your NetSuite implementation? Let us know by emailing hello@zoneandco.com. Finance in the Clouds posts bi-weekly on Fridays. So if you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to subscribe to Finance in the Clouds wherever you get your podcasts, or watch us on YouTube on the Zone & Co YouTube channel. Also be sure to visit zoneandco.com to read articles and guides all about this topic. Our next episode will be focused on the complexities of sales tax. You don't want to miss it. See you next time.